So CMS published the 2026 star ratings earlier this month, and those latest star ratings results are what we're going to be discussing today. First, I'll review the performance of the industry as a whole and talk about year-over-year changes. Then I'll deep dive into discuss a few themes that I see affecting changes in cut points. And then finally, I'll share some recommendations that all plans, both large and small, national and regional, can implement to improve their performance. All right, so let's begin with a performance review of the industry as a whole. So this first slide is a comparison of the year performance of all contracts overall star rating. So there's one row for each year, 2023 through 2026. And then I've sliced each row by the overall contract performance at each star rating level. So for example, in 2026, 4% of plans earned a 5-star, 14% of plans earned 4.5-star, and 23% of plans received 5 stars. I've highlighted contracts with an overall star rating of 4 stars or above because that's a very important threshold. 4 stars is the rate at which plans qualify to receive quality bonus payments. In 2023, about 50% of plans scored 4 stars, but that percentage has decreased in the following years. Now in 2026, we're seeing some stabilization, and there's very little change between 2025 and 2026. Around 40% of 4-star and above contracts around 40% of contracts are at 4 stars or above. That's the same as last year. So the average contract star rating moved from 3.63 to 3.65 this year. Very small amount of change. That's not to say there aren't instances where contracts didn't rise or fall. Around 50 plans lost their bonus payments as their ratings fell below 4 stars. Around 34 plans gained bonus payments as their plan's rating increased above that 4-star threshold. And notably, 74% of contracts that earned 4 stars or above last year retained their quality bonus payment status in 2026. And that's a very strong signal of consistency and quality. Now let's look at a very similar chart, except this time we're looking at enrollment instead of the number of plans. This bucket is the percentage of members who were enrolled in a plan that achieved the corresponding overall contract rating. So for example, in 2026, 2% of members were in 5-star plans, 35% of members were in 4.5-star plans. So in 2023 and 2024, around 70% of members were enrolled in a plan that scored 4 stars or higher. That percentage dropped in 2025 and rebounded ever so slightly in 2026. So this year, 60% of members are in a 4-star or above plan. So similar to last slide, we're seeing relative year-over-year stability and consistency. Now let's overlay the enrollment on top of the performance, showing you what proportion of beneficiaries were in plans at each star level for the most recent year. So to walk you through an example, 4.5-star plans only made up 14% of available plans, but they accounted for 35% of the enrollment. 3-star plans, on the other hand, made up 22% of the available plans, but only accounted for 8% of members. So as you can see, the bulk of members are enrolled in plans with higher star ratings. That's solid proof that the star ratings truly do matter to consumers. Plans with 4 stars or more make up 40% of contracts by number, but 60% of the members by enrollment. The Star Ratings plan continues to provide customers with meaningful guidance for selecting a Medicare plan, and customers consistently pick plans with higher star ratings. I'd like to take a moment to congratulate our Cotiviti customers on another very successful year. 44% of all 5-star contracts work with Cotiviti's Quality and Star solutions. Cotiviti supports 5.8 million members in 4-star or above contracts. And finally, the metric I'm most proud of, in a year where the market remained more or less stable, 23% of contracts with Cotivity's Quality and Star Solutions saw a year-over-year increase of at least zero point 0.5 stars. So congratulations on your accomplishments, and thank you for partnering with us to achieve your goals. Okay, now let's peel back a layer and look at the cut points that drove the performance outcomes we just reviewed. I'll start with a quick summary of the year-over-year cut point changes, then we'll discuss a few bigger themes I gathered from reviewing the bigger trends and looking at the data holistically. Here's an analysis of the year-over-year changes in cut points. Overall, 57% of cut points increased. At the individual cut point level, just around 60% of all 2, 3, and 4-star cut points increased, while only 45% of 5-star cut points increased. When the lower cut points are increasing faster than the higher cut points, then the cut points are going to get smushed together. Last year when I talked about this, I called it a compression of the performance range. The distance between the lowest performers and the highest performers isn't as big as it used to be, so the distance between one cut point and the next becomes smaller. This holds true again this year. We're seeing more compression of that performance range. Now let's look at the cut point changes for individual measures. Notice that the 5-star cut points have the most green because they changed the least, while the 2 and 3-star cut points are red because they changed the most. This table includes the year's biggest movers and shakers. At the top, we see COA Med Review increased by 11 points overall. And at the bottom, FMC increased by 33 points. As I mentioned, an increase in performance is expected year over year because plans are always trying to improve their measure scores. But beyond that, I see a few themes that are driving these cut point changes. Let's walk through each of them. So theme number 1, new measures without guardrails saw substantial cut point changes. I'll use FMC to demonstrate this theme. This chart shows FMC's cut points during the its first three years in the star ratings program, 24, 25, and 26. FMC's cut points increased by 33 points from 2025 to 2026, which we can confidently say is larger than typical growth. You can almost guarantee these large increases will happen with all new measures. Once measures come off the display page and move into the star ratings program, plans realize they have to start taking their performance seriously and figure out how to do well in them. It usually takes a few years for plans to find their operational groove, and so measures tend to stabilize by the third year that they're in the program. So CMS doesn't apply guardrails for those first 3 years to allow the cut points to accurately reflect the full movement and growing pains of the industry. After that, the guardrails will be applied after outlier performance is removed. So to summarize this theme, you should expect to see large increases in cut points during the first 3 years that a measure is new to the star ratings program. The next theme that I'd like to cover is that Tukey outlier deletion continues to affect established measures. Diabetes blood sugar control is a great measure to demonstrate this theme. So this graph is very similar to the last slide, showing that 2, 3, and 4, and 5-star cut points trending over time. The solid lines are where the official CMS cut points were set. The dotted lines show you where the cut points would have been set if there were no guardrails. Remember, guardrails limit the movement year over year to 5%. So let's focus on the 2-star cut points at the bottom in the dark purple. In 2026, the cut point increased by that maximum 5% allowed by the guardrails, moving that cut point from 49 to 54. But if guardrails weren't in place, that same 2-star cut point would have been set to 74. So in other words, the 2-star cut point would have been set 20 points higher if guardrails weren't in place. So how should we interpret this, and what does it mean for plans? I wanted to share a visualization to help explain what's going on. These charts depict the distribution of the industry's performance in the diabetes blood sugar control measure across all plans. So this is a compilation of the industry's performance. The chart on the top shows what that performance looked like in 2023, and the bottom chart shows what it looks like in 2026, the most recent year. In both 2023 and 2026, blood sugar control had a pretty normal distribution. You can see that bell curve shape in the performance. But there's a left tail to the measure that extends way out. That tail is what gets cut short by Tukey. So those really low scores are considered outliers and aren't included when cut points are set. And that causes the distance between the 2-star and 5-star cut points to compress. There's not as much of a range between the top and bottom scores. The other thing to notice here is the overall shift in performance. That curve on the bottom is shifting to the right. Overall, all of the scores across the industry got higher, and that peak is getting steeper. So as a whole, the industry is performing better in this measure and with more stability than they were in 2023. The performance is forming into that really nice bell-shaped curve. The removal of outliers drives up the cut points, and in response, the industry responds by performing higher. And that's cyclical. Each year, that left tail gets a little bit shorter as performance increases and centralizes around that median performance. So both of those things are at play when we look at blood sugar control's cut points. The cut point performance range is compressing over time. You can see the distance between 2 stars and 5 stars getting smaller. In 2023, there was 44 points separating 2 and 5 stars, but if there were no guardrails, that would have been reduced to just 17 points. When there's a big gap between the cut points with and without guardrails, plans should expect for cut points to continue to increase until they reach those unguardrailed lines. Depending on how big that difference is, it might take a few years to get there. And there's one more thing that we need to mention here with guardrails. There's a proposed rule to remove guardrails altogether. If that proposal was codified, the cut points would increase to that dotted line level all at once. So here's my takeaway for this theme. When you're planning your targets for upcoming years, you need to keep in mind that cut points will continue to increase for this measure and others like it, either incrementally if guardrails stay in place, or all at once if guardrails are removed. If your performance isn't already in, say, the mid 80s there, you should actively be working on increasing your performance in this measure. And you should be planning for these increases when you set your targets. All right, now let's talk about the third theme affecting cut points. Measures are greatly affected by the transition to digital measurement. So colorectal cancer screening is a great example of this. In 2026, COL switched from traditional to ECDS reporting, and medical record review was eliminated. This chart is very similar to the previous one. Again, the solid lines represent actual CMS cut points, and the dotted lines represent the unguardrailed cut points. Cut points dropped by about 20 points across all star levels from last year to this year, meaning all cut points hit the maximum 5% change allowed by guardrails. They would have changed by a total of 23 points without the guardrails. This drop can mainly be attributed to that transition to ECDS. Plans with highly integrated provider data and big plans that have the resources to perform year-round abstraction, they're going to continue to perform well in the ECDS measures. But on the other end, plans who are not as far along in their digital transition will suffer from that loss of hybrid lift. So opposite of the last theme, measures like this, all of the measures that are transitioning to ECDS, we'll see an expansion of the performance range rather than the compression. So this theme reflects that the industry as a whole is struggling with a transition to digital measurement, not because they're providing poorer care, but because they can't show their work and prove their numerator compliance. There's a lot more measures to transition to digital measurement ahead of us, and we should expect to see the same theme in other measures. So this brings me to my fourth and final theme. Higher rates don't always equal higher stars. I'm going to switch gears and talk about the national averages as a way to frame this theme. So the top table shows that national average rates and ratings are increasing across all measures. Rates increased for 60% of measures, but only 48% of star ratings increased. The same holds true with decreases. The average rate only decreased for 10% of measures, but the average star rating decreased for 33% of measures. That second table shows some examples of what this looks like at the measure level by defining the change in rate and star rating between last year and this year. So using our good example of diabetes blood sugar control again, the average rate increased from 83 to 84, but the average star rating dropped from 3.7 to 3.6. Let's dig deeper into this example and understand why this occurred, because it's a little counterintuitive. Blood sugar control's average rate shows a full recovery in performance after that drop from COVID. It's consistently increased from 76 now all the way up to 84. But the average rating hit its high in 2022 and has dropped ever since. So why don't those correlate? Why doesn't an increase in rate lead to an increase in star rating? You might already be able to guess from our earlier discussion of this measure, but let's check out the data again. So this is that same diabetes blood sugar control slide we looked at earlier. So I won't spend time reorienting you to it. In 2023, the national average was 79. And in 2026, that's up to 84. That national average increased because everyone's rates increased. If you want to get higher star ratings in this measure, you have to outperform the growth of the rest of the industry. So here's my takeaway from this theme. You already know that you need to invest in these measures to keep pace with the rest of the industry. But if you really invest in these measures and focus on improving their rates, these can represent real opportunities for plans. Because of that compression of the cut points range, it means that less of an increase is needed to achieve the next star rating. So if you can outpace the national increase, you can really have a positive impact on your stars. Okay, so there are a ton of interesting nuggets that we can gather from looking at the changes in cut points, and I could definitely talk about them all day. But I'm sure that you're more interested in this next part. So what? What should we be doing and what should we be focusing on in order to improve our performance? So I've collected some really tangible recommendations that plans can use as best practices, and I'll walk through those now. So first, make sure that your organization is up to date on the latest star ratings program changes. Stars leaders, this falls on you to educate your plans on the changes. There's 9 new measures in the star ratings program over the course of 3 years. That's 9 measures where you have a risk of underperforming if you don't anticipate those large increases in rates in the first 3 years. And that can have a huge impact on your overall star rating. Many of these new measures aren't easy to improve upon either. So plan for rate increases in the first 3 years and set your measure targets and predicted cut points accordingly. These are the types of changes that we're looking for in STAR Intelligence when we make our predicted cut points so that we can give our customers a good idea of where the market is heading. Plans just can't be afford to be caught off guard when there's these many changes happening. As a reminder, we do closely monitor all of the upcoming star ratings program changes and track them on our website, making it easy for our customers to stay up to date. So the star ratings calendar posted on Cotivity's website outlines all of the upcoming program changes, and I welcome you to scan this QR code on your screen to download Cotivity's CMS star ratings calendar. Okay, so this next recommendation gets into some details, but I think it's very worthwhile. So, my next recommendation is to model out how upcoming program changes affect your star ratings. I love using our scenario modeler and scenario comparison tools in Star Intelligence to model out these types of changes. So, here's an example of what I would do. On the left, I have my performance from the current year, and on the right, I use that same performance in the following year um, along with next year's cut points. This allows me to see how any program changes, absent of any changes in my performance, will affect my rates. So let me highlight some differences that I see in this particular scenario. First, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see diabetes blood sugar control again. That measure was at a 3-star, but drops to a 2 in the following year due to those cut point increases. So I've lost a star in a 3-weighted measure. Next, I have to account for measure differences. You see the red and green lines towards the bottom of the screen? So COA pain assessment was retired, which stings for this plan because it had a 4-star in that measure. The COA functional status assessment measure was added, but they're only performing at a 1-star in this measure. So in essence, I've lost 3 stars towards my overall performance due to the measure changes. And finally, we need to account for differences in methodology. On the left, we had the reward factor, which was retired and replaced by the EHO for all reward in the following year. For some plans, that could mean a direct impact of up to 0.4 stars on their overall contract rating. That's a lot of difference to be making up elsewhere. So being able to see all 3 of these changes together, the cut points, the measure changes, and the program changes, for this plan, it means a 0.5-star drop in this contract. And this is a scenario that I would expect a lot of plans to experience in 2027. The impact of the program changes is very specific to each organization. So understanding how your plan will be affected will really help you focus your energy and resources on the right areas. I highly recommend doing this activity during your planning and goal setting for the following year if you aren't already. If you can only focus your improvements on a few individual measures, you could be losing that bigger picture of how the program changes are affecting your overall contract rating. Again, STARS leaders, this falls on you to be educating your organization on the impact of the changes. Providing this evidence is what's going to help you justify requests for additional money and resources or explain why higher target rates are needed. My next recommendation is to make sure your organization is prioritizing the transition to digital measurement. A few years ago, Cotiviti created this bubble chart to visualize the contribution of hybrid data collection to each measure. A larger bubble equals larger hybrid lift. So COL averaged a 6% hybrid lift, which is relatively small compared to some of the measures further to the right. Recall that the COL cut points went down by 5% at every cut point level. The remaining measures have a much larger dependency on medical record review, and that's likely why NCQA has given plans more time to get their ducks in a row. HBD, CBP, and BPD are all closer to a 20% hybrid lift, so you can imagine how these measure transitions will affect both rates and cut points. My takeaway here is stay on top of your digital data collection. Make sure you're not relying on chart review and have found reliable methods to collect that data electronically. Analyze the loss of hybrid data collection now and ensure that you have a plan in place for the remaining measures. Cotiviti does have a lot of great resources available to help plans with this transition. So ask your account manager if you'd like more information about how we can help. Next up, let's talk about data. Having clean, complete, and timely data is a must-have for highly rated plans because it enables them to focus on areas that give them the best bang for their buck. They can calculate their return on investment and make data-driven decisions in a time when budgets are tight. So here's an example of how I would use data-driven decisions to tailor my approach to the breast cancer screening measure. In an ideal world, we'd use a blend of all 5 of the intervention strategies listed here to increase rates, as each one has its own pros and cons. But if I have a very limited budget for this measure, then I want to focus on member outreach and provider incentives because they have the highest ROI. ROIs are unique to each plan, and having good data about your organization is key to producing this type of analysis and focusing your resources in the right areas. So don't continue to do a program just because you've always done it. Calculate its ROI and determine if it's worth the resource. Innovative plans are definitely cutting low ROI programs and trying new ideas. Finally, my last recommendation, I know we're short on time, is to maintain alignment with key stakeholders. STAR teams are probably the most cross-functional team at a health plan. They really need to pull together our stakeholders from across the organization and align all of them to common goals, which is no easy feat. Review your current stakeholders and make sure everyone that's needed has a seat at the table. Obtain buy-in on strategy by educating them on the star ratings program, listening to their perspectives, and aligning the team to goals and meeting regularly to review progress. All right, let's summarize. Your focus for the next 30 days should be on you should be focusing on finishing the year strong. After the year finishes, assess your current state. Make sure you have a clear understanding of upcoming program changes and how they'll affect your organization and what you can do about it. Finally, over the next 365 days, don't forget to zoom out and focus on the more strategic big picture projects like digital transition and ROI analysis. These truly are best practices that can be used to set yourself up for success in any plan. So thank you for your time. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff to wrap us up.
Saying the CMS star ratings calendar here. If you didn't get a chance to view it earlier, please go ahead and scan the QR code. As a reminder of proposed and confirmed changes to the star ratings system, you can also just Google CMS star ratings calendar and it will come right up. We keep this calendar updated throughout the year, so bookmark this tool for an up-to-date reminder of proposed and confirmed changes to the star rating system. If you need help building a strategy, Cotiviti tracks and applies CMS's updates to measures and weights into our STAR intelligence solution and works with our clients to get ahead of anticipated challenges. In fact, we recently published a case study from a client highlighting their use of STAR intelligence and their partnership with their Cotiviti STARS analyst to develop a multi-year plan for STAR ratings measurement. Scan the QR code on your screen or just visit resources.cotiviti.com to view that case study at any time. This was the final webinar in our 2025 Quality Decoded series, but I'm happy to announce that we will be back in 2026 with important updates from CMS, NCQA, and more in the new year. We'll have a new schedule for you coming out in January. And finally, if you submitted any questions for March during our presentation today, your Cotiviti account team will follow up with you. You can also send an email to answers@cotiviti.com with any follow-up questions you may have, and we will answer them as soon as possible.